certainly enjoyed looking at the paintings on your website. So I'm really looking forward to hearing you.
Thank you, Tim. And I haven't updated the website in a couple of years. So my most recent work isn't really on there. And a lot of the older work isn't on there, but I will be showing some of the older work today. So it's quite a challenge to try to put together an idea that's this big and this vast into a single talk, but I'm going to do my best.
Well, I think that's usually our dilemma, you know.
Assuredly.
It's too bad we don't care about really simple things. Like the shape of an egg or something.
Well, you know, that's really interesting because one of the artists that I know that is very, very successful at this point, and she curates museum shows all over the world. When she first learned to paint, she taught herself to paint. She went to a museum show and saw all this work there, and she poked her friend and she said, I could do better than that.
Wow.
And the museum curator challenged her and said, if you think you can do better than that, you bring me your stuff and I'll give you a show. And she had never painted. So she went home and started with an egg. And then she said she painted about 300 paintings of an egg and of groups of eggs until she learned how to paint. That's how she learned.
Wow.
And then she went back with these paintings to the museum curator and he gave her a show.
Wow, that's great. What a wonderful story.
Yeah.
That's a terrific story.
And I think anybody that paints 300 eggs probably deserves a show.
No doubt.
Well, you're certainly going to learn something about eggs, right? That's like Sherry with her ice cubes. I mean, when you can see the universe in an ice cube, then you know that you've begun to paint.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. My name is Skip Conover and Tim Holmes is here. We're partners on the Wisdom Path Colloquia. And we have today with us Karen Wong, who is a multiple dimensional, to say the least. But the significant reason why we're here today talking to her is because of what we see in her artwork. And so without further ado, let me introduce Karen Wong, and I'll mute myself, Karen, so go ahead.
Well, I have to ask you first, can you still see me when I'm looking at my script here?
I can see you when you're looking at your script. I don't know if we'll be able to see you once you share your screen.
Well, I'm going to start. Let me see. I got to share screen. And I'm going to.
All right, we got that. We have your share screen going now.
Okay.
And
I want to show you.
The people in the Zoom can see you, but they won't be able to see you on YouTube.
Okay.
Or they will be able to see you on YouTube. They won't be able to see the rest of the gallery on YouTube.
Well, everybody can see this painting, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, I want to start with this painting because this is one of my favorite paintings of all time. And
wow, and this was done by you?
oh,
Oh, holy smokes.
no, this was done by Paolo Veronese. And it hangs in the Accademia Museum in Venice, which is my favorite museum. And it takes up an entire wall of the museum. It's vast. It must be 30 feet wide, I want to say. And it's called Feast in the House of Levi. Now, there's a very interesting thing about that title because he was originally commissioned by the religious leaders of his day to do a painting of the Last Supper. And this is what he presented them. And they were furious. They said, this is heretical. You can't possibly present this as the Last Supper because it doesn't give enough due to Jesus. And so he had to withdraw the title, but he changed the title to Feast in the House of Levi. And then he was able to present the work and have it displayed, and it has survived to this day, thankfully. And I'm going to revisit this painting when we get to the end, because I want to talk about the way that the elements and principles of design were used in this painting to illustrate a deep truth. So we're going to come back to this. And first of all, I want to thank Skip and all of you for giving me this generous invitation. Having an opportunity to share with you today is really important to me, because it's helped me to pull these ideas together into some kind of coherent form.
One moment, Karen, we have one issue here, which is apparently we are seeing your entire screen.
Okay, I got to stop share. There we go.
Stop share, and then
I can go back.
Share again, but only your PowerPoint.
Yeah. So am I okay now?
Let's,
Yes.
I am not seeing it.
Well, you don't need my PowerPoint. You just need me, because I'm just going to talk my way through this. Okay. And then whenever I need to share, I'll go back to screen share.
Okay. Fair enough.
Okay.
Yes.
So this idea has been in process, well, my whole life really, but 18 years that I've been actually thinking about it deeply. And I've had the Meaning Code channel for 2 years, and there's 144 90-minute conversations on the Meaning Code. So of necessity, this talk will only skim the surface. So Hans Zimmer, who is one of this generation's great composers, has said that he's always conscious of having his first phrase pose a question, which is then answered by the next phrase, and that sets a theme for the work. So having a question is a gift. It calls forth possibility. And for about 18 years, I've had this question, but it wasn't until I heard Jordan Peterson in 2016 speak of the importance of speaking truth that I took seriously the need to pursue that question. So I started the Meaning Code partly as a way to do research and partly as a way to outsource the question and rely on the distributed cognition of the community that follows this little corner of the internet. Now, even using the phrase distributed cognition knocks all the juice out of what happens on my channel, because my life has been so enriched by the interchange with my fascinating guests and my loyal and brilliant commenters. I love my comment threads. But where did this question come from? I had been trying to learn how to paint little pictures of flowers and village scenes and things like that in watercolor to decorate my house. And in the process of trying to learn more, I had started taking workshops with some significant watercolorists to teach me, but they always taught me their method. And so my paintings always ended up looking like their paintings. And then along came a teacher who had a different goal. His goal wasn't to teach me his method, because we didn't even paint in the same room with him, and he didn't even do demonstrations of his work. He wanted to teach us to break out of the bonds of the traditional kind of rules of watercolor, which are many, and to find a new way to develop our creativity. So in this class, we would get a lecture every week on one or two of the elements and principles of design. And then we had to go home and paint a painting that reflected some of that teaching. And we'll actually paint 2 paintings. Every week we had to do 2 large 22 by 30 paintings and bring them back for critique the next week. But there was a catch. All 20 paintings had to be the same subject. And all 20 paintings had to have that subject in the same place in the frame. So how many ways can you paint the same thing? And it turns out there's many, many ways that you can paint the same thing. So we had to carry a journal wherever we went, and every time an idea would strike, we had to write it down. So if you don't have your journal with you, you forget and you lose that idea, because inspiration comes without warning. Not all the ideas work, and that's okay, because brush mileage is what makes you better. More brush mileage, more possibilities. He also told a story that he read in a book called Art and Fear by Orland and Bales, which I highly recommend. The professor had a pottery class, and he said, I'm going to divide the class in half, and this half over here is going to get their grade based on how many pounds of pots they can create in a semester. And this side over here, you're going to get your grade based on the most beautiful pot that you can make. Well, not surprisingly, the half being graded on the beautiful pot spend most of their time thinking about how to create a beautiful pot. The side that was making pounds and pounds and pounds of pots ended up having the most beautiful pots because they were living out their ideas. So the principles and elements of design and the tight restrictions of that class ended up producing better paintings, not only for me, but for everybody else in the class. Many of the participants had never painted at all, and they still came up with incredibly beautiful, fascinating work. So this was intriguing to me because I've always kind of seen the world as made up of metaphors. Everything I look at always makes me start thinking about something else, and I get off on this rabbit trail of following that idea. And in my mind, one thing has a habit of representing another. So my question became, why is it that the elements and principles and the process of art making and creativity in general maps onto so many other academic disciplines, so many of the levels of reality? And then also in 2016, when I read Maps of Meaning and had such a hard time understanding Jordan Peterson's very dense terminology, why was it that all of a sudden, at a certain point in the book, my elements and principles of design and my process of art making began to perfectly map over onto the maps of meaning? So to follow that question, I've read a lot of books, listened to a lot of YouTube lectures in every discipline, had conversations with physicists, biochemists, philosophers, data compression experts, technology geeks, musicians, artists, students of dynamical systems, complexity, chaos theory, horse training, and even a cognitive scientist. As a result, I've been down many trails. So like I said before, today I can only scratch the surface and give you a glimpse into the world of creativity that is made possible through the act of art making. Now, Jordan Peterson speaks of the archetypal story. You're at point A and you want to go to point B. And as you proceed, it seems that everything fits in its proper category and life looks good. And then all of a sudden, something happens that doesn't fit that neat little package that you currently inhabit. That thing that doesn't seem to fit is the anomaly. Somewhere along the way, an anomaly appears and disrupts your journey. Perhaps you fall into chaos and everything you thought you knew is turned upside down. In the process of art making, you have to confront anomaly and sometimes fall into chaos. And this is also bound to happen to any human being who is actually attempting to live life, to move from here to there, to progress towards a goal of any kind. It even happens to simple organisms. A grain of sand is in the way, adapt, learn, grow your capacity. Now, people ask, what is the role of the artist? But I think that's kind of the wrong question. What is the role of creativity? Creativity is the path that makes sense of reality. That's an important distinction because every single human being is creative. Every book you've read, message you've heard, song you've sung, everything you've ever seen or heard or tasted, every relationship, every hurt, every victory, all of this has built a scaffold inside you so that every new contact with reality that you have gets entered into you in a totally idiosyncratic way. That means when you listen to me talking, you're hearing this talk through your own lens, and it is speaking to you at a level that no one else can hear. Language is very inadequate to this task. I discovered that when I turned 52, 53, and I had been painting for about 3 years. And I started to realize that although my my ability to articulate had decreased radically as my hormones were changing, and as I had a little child at that time. I had my second daughter when I was 46. So for many years, I had been speaking in very short words and very short sentences, and I had really lost my ability to articulate things clearly. But painting gave me this avenue to express something that was inexpressible otherwise. And every person needs to be finding some avenue of creativity to use that deeper level of communication, because every person has this very unique experiential DNA inside of them that needs to be communicated to the world so that we can all benefit. Painting, music, sculpture, drama, poetry, dance, cooking, sports, gymnastics, these are all avenues for creativity that have this in common. They're not organized according to finely tuned constants or rules or laws like the material world, but rather by a matrix of infinite flexibility that allows each person's uniqueness to shine through. I also want to make the claim that the hero's journey, the archetypal hero's journey, is identical to the process of creativity. Standing at the edge between order and chaos, and willingly confronting the chaos to find the treasures hidden there, is a fundamentally creative act. And it's not just the artist who is called to enact this role. It's the role of every man, every woman. If we see a world without meaning, we have no idea that we are called to this heroic journey. If we've never experienced that edge between order and chaos, never really understood the edge between the known and the unknown, we don't know that we can and must be creative. But we are made in the image of the Creator God, and creativity is built into us. So how does it get out? Well, I'll give you a hint. Love is part of the story, maybe the whole story. One of the cognitive scientists that I spoke to is Dr. Mark Solms, and he wrote the book, A Hidden Spring, A Journey to the Source of Consciousness. And he said this, and so I'm not scientific, I'm not a cognitive scientist, and when I hear something like this, the only way I can understand it is to put it into the terminology that I understand through creativity. But here's what he said. In the absence of precision, prediction errors will fail to induce any perceptual synthesis or motivated behavior. So my translation of that is that bringing an idea out of the fog to make it more precise requires action. Or in other words, action is necessary to establish a truth claim. My own experience in life has taught me that it is the anomalies that construct my life, the anomalies which guide me and cause me to grow. In fact, the anomaly itself is a gift, no matter what it looks like. All of the treasures of knowledge and wisdom can be found either in the uninvited chaos caused by anomaly or in the voluntary striving towards the highest good, worked out in community, acting truthfully by serving one another in love. That effort may cause many other anomalies to occur. And in fact, this voluntary striving towards the highest good is actually the underlying beauty of the process of art making, if that art making is done truthfully. There's a communal relationship that happens during the process of art making if you're working truthfully. So even as this idea was working its way out in my life, my art was taking a parallel journey. I began developing a process that I called my redemption paintings, where I would take an old painting that had failed, turn it upside down, look at the shapes and colors from that new vantage point and try to see if I could find a different image, a new path forward. One painting I remember particularly of this, and I don't have the image, is a painting. I had been trying to paint this woman who was a paraplegic, and she had a 3-year-old daughter and sitting on her lap in a wheelchair. And I had tried many times to paint her and just couldn't capture the essence of her beauty and her strength and her courage. And I had tried 3 or 4 times starting from a blank sheet of paper. But one day I picked up an old failed portrait that I had that happened to have a lot of texture and patterning in the background. And I turned that portrait upside down. And then I tried once again to paint her and her daughter, kind of fighting against that backdrop. And that painting just became so remarkably fascinating. And it had so much more depth and so much more meaning and purpose than anything I had done before, that it made me think, perhaps I need to begin with chaos in my work, and that gives me a backdrop against which to work. Now, of course, you can't create chaos yourself. We can't be random generators, because the minute that we put down one mark, the next mark is informed by that mark, because that's just the way our brains work. But I do my best to put a lot of chaos on the paper or on the canvas. And about the same time, I began to do a little side gig at events where I would solicit random marks from participants, let them generate the chaos, and then about an hour before the end of the event, I would see what I could see in that noise and produce a hopefully unified painting for one of the participants. Now I'm going to share screen again and see if I can find this thing that I want to show you. So these are some pictures of this process of people putting random marks on the paper. And you can see as it builds here, here's where I start applying some of my own work. And then this is the finished product. Now, obviously, this isn't my best work. It's something I put together in an hour. But you can see how I kind of saw something in the chaos that was produced by these people. And it made me think about koi fish and lily pads. And so I sort of imposed some line work on top to create some boundaries, and then tried to play with letting the background and foreground work together, but still be able to identify some of the interesting things that were there. So here's another one that was in process. This is another painting at another event. People make all sorts of interesting marks, and it gets more and more complicated. And eventually I started trying to find something there. And this was the finished work. This time I saw birds and flowers, and I don't know why that screen share thing is still in the middle of the screen, so you can't see the top of the bird's head, but such are the limitations of Zoom. You are able to see the
screen. Click on that little X on the side. Or maybe just move it to the side.
I can move it. Look at that. The magic of technology. So in this one, I was sort of trying to get my focal point right up here, get you to look there. So the lines are all, the directions are all kind of moving there. And here's this little bird with his little fat belly. If you look back to, you can see that little fat belly. I don't know, you probably can't see my cursor, but in that same quadrant of the painting, there's this little fat round thing that someone had stuck on there right about, it's over in the upper right quadrant when it's on its side like that. But so that's the kind of thing I play with in these paintings, and trying to take chaos and turning it into something else. And I guess that's it for that one. So I'm going to stop share there for a second and go back to where we're at here. So what was really happening was that I was making myself open to noise, and that noise began to increase my capacity to see. In other words, to really attend to what was there. There's a weird thing about seeing, because everything that we see is actually in the past already. When we can only see the future through whatever patterns are available to us. And here's where I began to notice that my close attention was rewarded by the emergence of a pattern structure of relationships between the constituent elements of that complex system. So even in those progressive paintings, the countless individual marks by the many participants set up a kind of distributed cognition. And if you look carefully, patterns can be seen in that noise. Now, sometimes in my own work, when I have more time, I take a look and I can't really get to where I want to get with that chaos that I created in the beginning. As I progress, I just have to add a little bit more noise. And then I begin to see the patterns, begin to see what's coming out. On the very first episode of the Meaning Code, people sometimes ask me, how do you get the people to come on and talk to you? Well, this guy had actually emailed me when he heard me on Paul Vanderklay's channel talking. And he emailed me and he said, I think you want to talk to me. So he was my first guest because I didn't know where else to look. And he was a geologist from Illinois. And he was very interested in stochastic resonance and how it was somewhat analogous to my painting process. So here's the Wikipedia definition of stochastic resonance. It's a phenomenon in which a signal that is normally too weak to be detected by a sensor can be boosted by adding white noise to the signal, which contains a wide spectrum of frequencies. The frequencies in the white noise corresponding to the original signal's frequencies will resonate with each other, amplifying the original signal while not amplifying the rest of the white noise. Now, this is something that if you have let's say you have a radio broadcast or they use this a lot in spy movies, somebody has said something, you can't quite hear what they're saying. The sound technician adds some white noise. The white noise kind of amplifies parts of the signal, and those parts of the signal get amplified and actually allow you to understand what was being said. And that's exactly kind of what's happening when I keep adding noise onto my work. At a certain point, I begin to see what is there in the painting. So this was just one of the many interesting things that I learned at the Meaning Code, and that began to show me that there is an analogous nature of the truth that exists at every level of reality. Truth is everywhere you look if you're looking for it. So in some way, the artist is always trying to take the portion they see of reality and make it explicit. But what is the nature of reality? We need a binocular vision to see. So we have that binocular vision in many ways. There are so many polarities that exist in the world. And Ian McGilchrist's book, The Master and His Emissary, talks about the left and right hemispheres of the brain and the very complicated way in which they interact with each other, and the way the right hemisphere interacts with reality. That's the really cool thing. Only the right hemisphere has access outside of the body, outside the brain. The right hemisphere brings in and then transfers it over to the left hemisphere. The left hemisphere works it, maybe dices it into pieces, reconstructs it into something. And McGilchrist's thesis is that nowadays we leave stuff over in the left hemisphere and we don't bring it back to the right hemisphere to be reincorporated into our search for reality. It's an interesting thesis. It's a great book. But art is implicit and science is explicit, according to McGilchrist. And so ultimately, the left hemisphere of the brain needs to offer its static, constructed version of the world back to the right hemisphere in order to incorporate it into the embodied experience. And that's part of what art making does for us. Some people say that reality is just particles and waves and everything's broken down to the very smallest components, and there's no meaning there. But my experience with art and creativity tells me a different story and offers me a different lens through which to see the world. So at this point, I'm going to try to share my pathetic slideshow. And it probably won't be very helpful, but we will see what we can do. Slideshow is here. We're going to share. Why is that there? Okay. So this is a list of, you've seen this list before, I'm sure, of all the disciplines. Philosophy, the queen of disciplines, and out of that is this mystical world of mathematics, and then physics, and the physicists would say that they are the queen of the scientists, and on we go. And eventually you get through psychology to economics to history. And when I talked to Paul Vanderklay one time, I was explaining to him how it looks to me as though all these disciplines or domains of knowledge somehow all stack up on top of each other. And when you can see through the holes of all of them, you get a much closer picture of what reality is. But that the connections between those different layers is something like when you hit that spot in that discipline where you discover beauty or truth or love in the midst of that discipline. Those are kind of the connecting points that get these all working together. Like I said, my slideshow is not very great. So the title of the talk is Creativity as the Decoder Key, the process of art making as a map to finding meaning. And you've already heard my introductory remarks, and I'm about to give you an overview of the paradigm of design. And I've already given you a little bit of the description of my approach to art making. Then there will be these key principles, or maybe you would call them aspects of the process of art making. And at the end, I'll have a few observations and a wrap up, and then we're going to have the question and answer session. All this is so obvious, it didn't even need to be on a slide. So this is going to be the general order in which I discuss these things. I'm going to start with boundaries because I think that is one of the very important aspects of creativity. And then the elements and principles, the role of fear and potential, the inside outside, which is one of the aspects that I learned about from my physicist friend that just seems to have so many interesting paths for exploration. Then the role of seeing and accuracy and expression, simplicity, unity and multiplicity, and dominance. If I had been able to figure out how to make slides, I would have made a slide on each one of them, but such is life. So I want to show you this so that you kind of understand what I'm talking about when I talk about the matrix of the elements and principles. Down the left-hand side, you will see the elements, which are the constituents out of which every work of art is made. Line, size, shape, direction, color, value, and texture. Every painting has these to some proportion, but you can decide which proportion of each is going to be in your painting and how you're going to use it. And these can each interact with each other. So for example, you could have line that has a varying size, and line can be used to encompass a number of different shapes, and line can have various directions, and line can be composed of color, and line can be dark or light in terms of value. Line can be used to create texture. So these things all interact with each other, but then in addition, they all interact with these principles that run across the top. And the principles are unity, harmony, contrast, dominance, repetition, variation, gradation, and balance. So if you just fill in the matrix, you've got 56 possibilities. But what you have to keep in mind, well, you've got 56, and then you've got whatever, these are all interacting with each other. I guess that would be 7 squared, which would be another 49, or is it 7 to the 7th? I'm not sure how all that works. Anyway, you're getting up there. Then you have to imagine that each one of these principles is actually a sliding scale from very little to very much, or very small to very large. How much contrast, how much dominance, how much repetition, how much gradation. These things are, it's like doing calculus and dicing something into an infinite number of pieces. Once you start all of this interaction going, you have infinite possibilities. So I'm going to stop share there for a minute. And am I back on the screen now? Okay.
Yep.
So somebody going to try to say something there?
No, I just wanted to assure you that you're back.
Oh, okay. Thank you. So one of the first things that I noticed, as I said, is that the importance of boundaries. So if you think about a painting, your first boundary is the size of the painting. If you make a small painting, it's going to have a different quality than if you make a very large painting. But whatever size you choose, that's your boundary. You can't go beyond it. So the interesting thing is that creativity all happens inside boundaries. And, at the beginning, I told you about the constraints of that class. They were very strict constraints. And because they were very strict constraints, they had the effect of catapulting me into a place of creativity that I had no idea was even possible. I had always thought, I am not a creative person. I'm not very good at drawing. All I can do is kind of do a sort of poor copy in watercolor of this pot of flowers and be thankful that my daughter was willing to hang it on her living room wall. But that was the extent of it. And then I took this class and I was forced to begin really seeing and really contemplating ideas and really thinking about possibilities. Because once you've painted the same thing 3 times, 4 times, maybe you change the colors here and there, but how many times can you just change the colors and paint the same thing before boredom sets in? So all of a sudden, new worlds of possibilities began to occur to me. So anyway, boundaries generate creativity. The old, what would you call it? The old cliche that our mothers used to always say is necessity is the mother of invention. These things our mothers used to say are much truer than we could ever imagine. So you have the boundary of the outside of your canvas or paper, or the size of your sculpture, or the length of your piece of music, or, the chapters in each book. And you not only have that kind of boundary, but you also have the edges between things. You have a line that goes around a shape, or you have another boundary, which is the limitations of your skill. And you have the edge between the known and the unknown. But there's an interesting thing about boundaries. They have to have a particular quality. So you might have noticed that in those simplistic paintings I was doing at the events, my lines were pretty uninteresting. Just draw a line around something and then try to put some color inside of it. It was a shortcut to trying to create a picture. But if I was working on that at home, I would try to make sure that my lines had some places that were broken, or had some gradation or had a fuzziness to them, something that allows you to see a way for the inside and the outside to have a connection with each other. For example, cells have permeable boundaries to allow osmosis and other intercellular transactions. So the work itself has to have a particular type of boundary, one that allows something left to the imagination of the viewer, give them a place to connect. So last night, just for fun, to see if this decoder ring actually works, I opened Maps of Meaning to a random page, which happened to be page 239. And I wrote down a paragraph. I'm going to read that paragraph for you. I probably should have put this on a slide. Maybe I can send this to you guys later. The object always remains something capable of transcending the bounds of its representation. It is something that inevitably retains its mysterious essence, its connection with the unknown, and its potential for the inspiration of hope and fear. The actual or transcendent object, in and of itself, insofar as such a thing can be considered, is the sum total of its explored properties plus that which remains unexplored, the unknown itself. So in the margin of that paragraph, I had written, this is the role of the artist, to make the unknown known, to look deeply, to see, to gather, in order to reveal that mysterious essence. The artist is confronting reality itself and seeking to make it known, to go beyond just the map and to represent the territory. And I believe that in order to do this properly, we have to begin with the presumption that reality is good. Reality is true. Reality is beautiful. And as Jordan Peterson always says, we must believe that being itself is good. So inside of our space-time universe that we inhabit, being doesn't happen without boundaries. In this universe, everything has a boundary. That's what makes it a thing. It's one thing and not another thing. One thing as opposed to the background in which the thing resides. So in art, you have the positive space and the negative space. And then you also have the edge between. These constraints or limitations are essential for creativity. In fact, they're essential for any forward movement. You have to limit your choices in the field of infinite options. Peterson always says that at any given moment, we're confronted by an uncountable myriad of choices that have to be narrowed by some set of constraints in order to give us a logical path forward. The tighter the constraints, the more creative we have to be to navigate the challenges. Maybe this is why some great books have been written in prison. So the process of creation, which begins with these tight constraints, then begins to open up alternate pathways. Choices must be made on the journey, small or large, or somewhere in between, red or blue, or a combination, thin or thick, light or dark, joy or grief. What percentage of each of these? So how do you corral all these choices? Over the centuries, people have noticed that in art that has persisted, art that has lasted, these elements and principles show up. Now, that doesn't mean the artists were thinking about these elements and principles when they painted the work, but it does mean that these elements and principles are inherent in the fabric of the universe. There's something about creativity that has these infinite number of dimensions to it. And even when an artist isn't attempting to paint along these lines, it will still show up in their work. to some extent. The other thing is you can't be thinking about these things when you're actually painting, because then your brain gets all messed up with this stuff. You have to have a space where you can just interact with the work itself. But the elements and principles are very helpful after you've done some of the work to step back and kind of assess, is there a reason why I'm hung up at this point? I need something else to help me kind of keep moving forward. Or is there a way I can get more direction to this piece by adding gradation? Is there a way that I can increase the impact by varying the value ratio in the painting? So all of these things are things that you can look at as you're working with the elements and principles. So again, with the decoder ring this morning, just before I sat down to do this, I opened up the book and I got another paragraph just randomly. I just opened up a page in the book. And and I got this paragraph, which just blew my mind because I had already spent 30 hours writing this talk. And here pops up this paragraph that would have made things so much clearer to me if I had just started with it. So here's Peterson. We use our stories to regulate our emotions and govern our behavior. They provide the present we inhabit with a determinate point of reference, which is the desired future. The optimal desired future is not a state, however, but a process. The intrinsically compelling process of mediating between order and chaos. It is the process of the incarnation of logos, the word, which is the world creating principle. Identification with this process, rather than with any of its determinate outcomes, that is, with any idols or fixed frames of reference or ideologies. Identification with this process ensures that emotion will stay optimally regulated and action remains possible no matter how the environment shifts and no matter when. In consequence of such identification, respect for belief comes to take a second place to respect for the process by which belief is generated. So how can each work be unique even though artists have access to the same resources for producing the work? Well, one of the things that I do is build a set of limits for myself. For example, you can limit your colors. And I can show you a slideshow here. Whoops, I have to go back to, sorry about that. Got to share screen. I get mad at myself when I don't do this right. Here we go. Okay, here's a series that I did where I severely limited my palette. And in this, I'm working with only 4 colors: gold, red, black, and white. But I think you can see how the elements and principles are working together. For example, I'm aiming for 75 to 80% light in this painting and about 20% dark. I'm aiming for creating a focal point that's not too obvious, but with directional pieces that are going to lead you to that focal point while taking you on a little journey around the work. I'm aiming for some subtlety within the darker areas so that they're not just flat. I'm aiming for non-identical repetition. I'm aiming for visually interesting line work. I'm aiming for soft and hard edges to both be evident. I'm aiming for something that gives a place for the imagination of the viewer. I think I have one more piece in here. Here's another one. So I had 5 that was in this series. And this gives you an idea of what I do when I'm doing my non-objective work. So I'm not on share screen anymore, right?
Right.
So a simplified palette is one example of a voluntary constraint or a boundary. But however we look at it, boundaries are essential. And I could write an entire book on the issue of boundaries. So I'm probably spending too much time on it here, but honestly, I'm only just barely touching the surface of this. So if there was no natural boundary for the work, creativity wouldn't be possible. And in physics, we find that boundaries is what makes the development of order possible. You have energy input into a specific space, and that is what allows for the creation of order. The process of making art consists of a relationship between the idea and the maker. And then you also have the tools and the materials and the substrate that bring that idea into being. So the maker must be both embodied and exploring, while at the same time in relationship with the conceptual universe. Which means that whatever is inside me is trying to find a way to be outside of me and to be materialized, realized into a space that can be known by others. I think I already went over this part. So let's see. Here's just a few random thoughts about boundaries before I move on to potential. Boundaries, constraints, limits, and edges are pretty much sharing the same space. Now, we can have voluntarily accepted limits and naturally occurring constraints, which stretch us and help us to grow and mature. But self-inflicted boundaries, if you think about like the limitations that are brought about through addiction or being trapped in an ideology, those self-inflicted boundaries bring about a reciprocal narrowing until there's no escape. There's no capacity for creativity left without an input of energy from the outside. Regarding this, I've done a couple of episodes on the work of a particle physicist named Sharon Glotzer, in which I think if she just understood what she was doing with boundaries, her work would be much more effective. But, you know, who am I to say? So these limitations allow the deeper realities to be communicated because they compress the data necessary for accuracy and expression. And I'm going to talk a little bit about accuracy and expression later. The edges between things in a painting need that quality because it allows one to play with another so that there's a dance, a leading, a way to sometimes withdraw, sometimes advance. In some of my paintings, I like to play with the background and foreground, exchanging places with each other so that when you look at it, you can't quite see what the subject is until you spend some time looking at it. So in thinking about this, I realized that for me, myself, my edge, the edge of my conceptual universe and the edge of my physical body, both, is the place that carries all the potential, so that when my edge meets the edge of another, that potential can create new meaning. In other words, the space between us is the breeding ground for something new to arise. I do almost all my thinking in conversation with other people. So thinking with a blank piece of paper in front of me is a real struggle. And I think that's why I started with this idea of always having chaos as a place to begin. Because then I'm sort of in competition with the chaos, almost like having a good competitor in a race, you know, like a guy that's preparing for the Olympics. He will have a running partner who pushes him so that he has someone to push against as he's striving. And for me, that's what chaos does. So we talked a little bit about how the beginning of painting has this infinite potential that we have to work through. And this also fits into this idea of entropy. So I'm just going to spend a minute or so about that because I think this is really important. The beginning of a painting is this field of infinite potential. You have this blank space. And each choice that you make after that limits that potential. Each potential choice collapses to an actual choice, just as the probability wave collapses to a particle when it's observed. In a painting, the choice is made when the stroke is laid down. And each succeeding choice is informed by that previous choice. That's just the way our minds work. We are influenced by what we look at, what we attend to. And in this way, the final painting never manifests the totality of the painting that was originally in your mind. Each choice narrows the subsequent field of choices. So when I showed you those progressive paintings, some of the participants were sad that their marks got covered up in the end. But when you're creating order out of chaos, some things must be covered up or erased. If you think about this, when an embryo matures from the beginning, the shapes and colors and details change as the embryo matures into a human being. So what came before, in a sense, is forgotten. When new order is created, entropy increases in the universe, and entropy is a kind of forgetfulness. I learned this from my physicist friend the other day, because you no longer have the information necessary to recreate the previous state. But if an artist didn't experience this forgetfulness, if the artist didn't have the opportunity to change colors or erase or restate, then there would be no way to complete a work. So the parade of forgetfulness of the original condition has begun, just as in when you build a house, the skeleton of the house is covered up by the siding, and then the siding is covered up by the paint. So entropy is inevitable, but it's also somehow part of the source of our creativity. I have things to say about the inside and the outside, which I think are important, but I might skip that in order to move ahead a little bit here. So I said before that becoming an artist is a matter of learning a new way to see. And one of the guys that I have met on my channel is a philosopher who's working on his book. And he said this one time, which I thought was so great. Aristotle, somewhere in the metaphysics, I think, perhaps in the beginning, prized the eyes above and beyond the nose and the lower senses because of its ability or capacity to see opposites, not for what they are and not for what they are not, but to see and to see in such a way that the seeing gathers. That is to say, the seeing does something other than seeing itself. It gathers the content, so we prize it above our hands. It gathers the content, so we give it more credit than our feet. Perception gathers the material, so we declare our maxims in the language of optics or its contrast, the mysterious beginning of sight. That's Matthew Allison. I love the way he uses language. So seeing gathers the content. In a way, the artist is curating the world of the material things along with the meaning in the immaterial world and presenting it to the viewer. We can think of that kind of seeing as that light bulb moment when an idea makes a connection in our minds to what we already know and allows us to apprehend the concept in a way that makes it useful and productive to us. It's the same thing with visual apprehension. We gather the content and find places in our stored visual memories to make connections and to build our world. So just before I read that Matthew Allison quote, I had been reading the book of John, chapter 8, 56 to 58, where Jesus is using the word know, and he's telling the people that they didn't know God, and he did know God. So I got to wondering, is it the same word used for know in both instances? It is not. When he says that they do not know God, he's using gnosko, the experiential knowing. The word, we get our word gnosis or Gnostic from that. But when he says that he does know God, he's using the word eido, which is a way of perceiving or seeing. And I wonder if that's what Aristotle was talking about when he used the word seeing. That kind of seeing is akin to looking with the eyes of love. So becoming an artist is largely learning a new way of seeing, to see the color in the shadows, to see the shapes of the line that defines the edge between the trees and the horizon. How do I perceive a tree? Is it just a utilitarian vehicle for shade or lumber? Or is it a portal to the wonder of God's creative love for all that his hands have made? To really look at a tree and to see all of its simplicity and complexity, its scientific wizardry and its poetic capabilities and its life-giving nurture for the birds of the air and the way it draws life from the soil and the air. It would take a book to do justice to all there is in a tree, maybe a library. The same is true of any part of creation if I truly look and then see in this eido sense of perceiving, knowing, integrating its truth and goodness and beauty into my being. When an artist looks at something, truly trying to see in order to recreate either the look of it or the essence of it or the feeling of it, they're not only looking at the outside, what is visible to the naked eye, but they're also looking to that which is invisible, that which is inside, that which conveys meaning and purpose. And here I'd like to show you a painting that I did. It's a painting that I did whoops, this always happens. I apologize. I want to show you a painting that I did. Years ago, when I first started this creativity class. Can you all see that? Can you see that?
Yes, we can see it.
Oh, okay. So this is a painting I did as the fourth in a series of paintings when the very first class I ever took on this creativity thing. And this is a picture of my daughter's piano teacher hands on the piano keys. And I had a vision of this painting in my head that I just couldn't create with paint. Just didn't become what I wanted it to become. So when I showed it in the critique, I was just flattened. We weren't permitted to complain and we weren't committed to explain how we had failed. So I had to just stand there with this thing in front of the class for the critique. And I was so overwrought with my sense of kind of shame and fear of failure and of being exposed in front of all these people that I was practically in tears. But when I looked out at the people in the group, they were in tears. And they were telling me that they saw something so deep in this painting that it just really spoke to some deep part of them. And that gave me a tremendous realization that it is not in my capacity to make a perfect painting that the meaning resides, but it's in the way that it connects with the viewer that the meaning resides. And I explained to them that this painting, what I was trying to do with this painting is to show that my daughter's piano teacher had said, it's the placement of the fingers on the keys and the strength of the stroke, the impact of the stroke in the right place that produces the beauty of the tone. And when I had been contemplating that photograph of my daughter's teacher's hands on the keys, thinking about that, I thought, that's the way God works in my life. He knows exactly the right place to apply the pressure, to bring the meaning and purpose and beauty into my life. And that was what I was trying to convey here. Even though the water didn't turn out with the beautiful strength and vigor that I had wanted it to, and the sky wasn't this beautiful gradated sky that I wanted to create, nevertheless, this painting spoke to them. So that was a big learning for me that I needed to remember in my subsequent work. And this is kind of a strange thing, but here is another painting that I did further along in that series, or it may even have been after that series was over, when I was in a different frame of mind. And you'll see how much difference there can be in the approach you take to something. So in this particular other piece, if I can find it, I think it's here. Yeah, no. Maybe I can't find it. Did I lose you guys?
No.
Well, I'm just going to forget about trying to find that painting because I had it all set up and it disappeared on me.
Oh,
That's
it's a lovely screensaver.
yes, thank you. That's one of my pieces. It's part of one of my pieces. So I guess I'm not going to be able to show you that piece. But anyway, there was another piece that I did of the hands of the key on the piano when I was going through an intense relational struggle with one of my children. And it had a completely different feeling to this. Perhaps I'll be able to find it later. So one of the things that came out of this whole approach to painting was that vision always outruns skill. So in that painting, I had a particular vision. I think I need to stop share, don't I? In that painting, I had a particular vision, and I didn't succeed in that vision. So what could I do then? Well, I had to assess my work and say, obviously, there's some skills I need if I want to create that vision. So I began pursuing those skills. But even after I pursued those skills, by the time I had enough skill to recreate that painting, I had something else in mind entirely. So my vision had gone far out ahead of my skills, and now I needed to develop new skills again. So the definition of success, some have said, is to experience failure after failure with undiminished enthusiasm. And that's the life of the artist. You're always striving towards the high calling of vision. It's the life of a baby, always striving to fulfill their desire of getting across the room to get that toy in the corner. They're willing to experience failure after failure with undiminished enthusiasm. It's that striving for the aim that makes meaning possible, striving for that accurate aim and a consistent follow through that enables us to develop a relationship with reality, with the truth. We are to love truth, aim for truth, serve truth, and out of that, good will come. Speak the truth, at least don't lie, says Jordan Peterson. And what comes from speaking the truth will be good, no matter what it may look like to you. So unity and multiplicity is also a big part of all this. And I want to talk about, don't really have time to go into that, but I am going to show you a picture here of, we talked about the elements and principles of design, and I wanted to say that one of the most important of all of them is the issue of dominance. So here's an example of dominance. And I'm going to share screen to get there. So in this painting, you can see that there's a dominance of kind of a soft blue-green almost everywhere in the painting. And the artist has given you the complement in this little sun that's right up there in the upper right-hand quadrant. So the sun is the focal point, but the other thing that you want to notice is that everywhere, even in the big dominant area, there's little sparkles, little hints of orange, all of which make the orange glow even more because you buried those little hints out there in the dominance. And then you also see that as your eye falls away from the sun, that the reflections in the water are going to lead you around until you see that boat down there with the two people in it. So really, which one was Monet's focal point? Maybe the people were really the focal point, and he is trying to set up a direction for you in order to go there on a slow journey instead of just being trapped into one focal point. And you'll notice all the linear work that he uses in very subtle ways that leads you around the painting. And you'll notice all of the variety that's in that large field of color. It's not just a big flat surface, but there's all kinds of variety in the way that he has used strokes, in the way that he has used his color work. So I think this one is a very good example of many of the elements and principles, but especially the principle of color dominance. So the arrangement of lines and sizes and shapes on the substrate has this infinite possibility, incredibly complex and unpredictable. And how you, the artist, arrange them is a consequence of your own experiential DNA, your web of knowing, and your focus and the aim of your seeing and the gathering together of what is pertinent to the moment. I don't know if you've ever seen these pictures of the bowerbird. I thought this was pretty cool. Here's the male bowerbird. And he creates this nest. Somehow he knows how to attract a female. And his nest, of course, is made of all these neutral colors of the twigs and the leaves in the background. And he goes out and finds this beautiful bright blue. And he seems to be attracted to this kind of cobalt blue. Where he finds these things, I don't know. But he finds all of these things of this incredibly cobalt blue so that all these little sparkly things are out there in the neutrals. And they lead your eye around. And he's got this beautiful composition going on. And that's a bowerbird. So this capacity for creativity is somehow built into the thread of the universe. Now, here's an interesting thing that I learned about quantum mechanics, and this kind of blew my mind, but it's from a book by Roger Penrose. He says that any two electrons must necessarily be completely identical. The same holds for any two protons and for any two particles whatsoever. That is not merely to say that there's no way of telling the particles apart. The statement is considerably stronger than that. If an electron in a person's brain were to be exchanged with an electron in a brick, the state of the system would be exactly the same state it was before, not merely indistinguishable from it. The same holds for protons and for any other kind of particle, and for whole atoms, molecules, etc. If the entire material content of a person were to be exchanged with the corresponding particles in the bricks of his house, then in a strong sense, nothing would have happened whatsoever. What distinguishes the person from his house is the pattern of how his constituents are arranged, not the individuality of the constituents themselves. So that statement, I mean, we could spend all day unwinding that statement just in what it says about unity and multiplicity and what it says about people. But where does that pattern come from? So I wanted to show you some of the variety of work that has come out of my series work. And let's take a look at this dragonfly series. I hope the music is not too irritating. I can go shut it off if I need to, but in this one, I was trying to work with a quadrant of spatial variety. I was trying to develop this working with 4 quadrants of unequal size, and then to see how much I could do to bring variety to each of those 4 quadrants. And at the same time, trying to find a way to make every inch delicious. And now this is one that I did after the series was over, because we're not permitted to really change our subject. And this is not exactly a dragonfly, but I was using the same composition. The separation between the 4th and 5th woman here is separating the quadrants, and then their heads going across the top is also a separation of the quadrants. But this is what happens when I play with an idea for a while, and then I find another way to use it. And then I think there's one more here that I did for myself. I did this one for myself. It's 60 by 60, and I was playing with the same idea, but it's a peacock rather than a dragonfly. Again, limiting the palette, finding a way to make the line work, enticing, get the directional movement going, making a journey for the viewer, all of those kinds of things I was working with there.
Karen, I need to interrupt you just for a moment. Would you be able to continue this beyond the 2-hour period? Because I know that this group that's on Zoom with me is bursting with questions right now and comments. And
I apologize for it going longer than I expected it to. I thought I had timed it out.
You don't have to apologize. I only want to ask because if you can't stay after the top of the hour, we're going to have a separate session just for Q&A, which is okay, but
I have plenty of time, so that's no problem, but I don't want to wear you out.
No worries. Okay, we will take a mandatory 5-minute break at the top of the hour to give everybody a refreshment opportunity, and then we will continue. Whether or not we're in the Q&A at that time, we will take a 5-minute break at the top of the hour. So go ahead, Karen.
I appreciate all of your patience. I'm skipping over some stuff here because I don't want to take up your whole day, but I will.
I can assure you that nobody that's here is the least bit worried about that.
Okay, well, I'll keep plugging away then. So on this issue of dominance, which I just touched on, the reason dominance is so important is it's dominance that makes unity possible. Now, my creativity teacher told me this, and it took me a long time to work out in my own head why that is so, and what are all the implications of that, because it's a very, very deep idea. So in a painting, you have the dominance and you also have the focal point, And those two things have to work together. Dominance, of course, plays itself out through all of the elements and through all of the principles. So there isn't any one thing that is dominant. You can have a dominance of line, or a dominance of texture, or a dominance of color, a dominance of value, if you think about it. Think about a painting. If you had all kinds of shapes and they were all equal sizes on a painting, it would end up looking more like wallpaper than it would looking like a unified work. So you can't just have everything be equal. Paintings that are half light and half dark, or half warm and half cool, will always feel incomplete and off balance. So my teacher said, try for the Papa, Mama, Baby design. Papa about 80%, Mama 15%, Baby 5%. The Papa is about 80. Let's say I'm going to try one that's 80% mid value, 15% light, and 5% dark. The mid value in this case would be the dominant value, because covers about 80% of the real estate. But that is not a dominance that seeks to control or to exercise power, but rather it's a dominance that is there to support the focal point, to be in relationship with it. So it is with God's creation. The dominance works through the multiplicity to bring unity. Calculus is a really good example of this because, just think about it. Think about ant colonies working through the multiplicity to bring unity. Think about community. Think about the body of Christ and the church, the way it is supposed to be. Hearts united, supporting one another, striving for excellence, always moving further up and further in, just like the asymptotic direction of calculus. So years ago, I worked as a consultant for Procter & Gamble, and I was training their Japanese employees to be effective in the business environment because our cultures are so different. And I had to learn the Procter & Gamble way. So the Procter & Gamble method for developing leadership is that every employee is supposed to work in such a way that they make it possible for their boss to move up in the company. And they're also supposed to teach and encourage those under them to gain the skills and experience they need to be able to move up and take their place when they move up to take their boss's place, because their boss is going to move up because they're doing such a good job for their boss. So up and up and up, everybody's going, everybody's striving to help each other. It's a communal relationship, and it's a relationship of helping and support. So that's the picture of the good dominance that holds the hierarchy together in a painting. Of course, this issue of dominance is incredibly complex when you move out in the world and you look at finances and you think about the Pareto principle, which Peterson talks about all the time, that 20% of the population will inevitably hold 80% of the wealth. And interestingly enough, 20% of the planets in the universe have 80% of the mass. These principles are challenging to understand, but that's also part of our path to explore and press onwards and try to get ever closer to the truth. So the dominance provides the foundation, and the focal point is the thing towards which all eyes are drawn, the reason for which the work was created. So the viewer takes a journey for a purpose. The dominance is the stable bottom of the hierarchy, and the focal point is the top, but both are necessary. The highly competent leader at the top of a hierarchy has to always go back down and draw up those at the bottom to strengthen and encourage and create potential for their upper movement. It's a reciprocal relationship, just as it was between the orange and the blue in that Monet painting I showed you. The dominance allows itself to be in the background so that the focal point can gain prominence. So building a work of art sort of consists of opening yourself up to it and then noticing how it opens itself up to you. And then you build a relationship with it, and you see and you notice And you have to continue to love the process and love the work that is the culmination of the process, even when it gets hard, and even when it goes through that adolescent stage, even when you want to tear it up in pieces and throw it in the fire. Love is required to go the distance in your relationship with your work. I found this story of Dorothy Sayers quite beautiful. The book she wrote called The Mind of the Maker, about the artistic process back, I think she published it in 1950. Here's what she said. Every work of creation is threefold, an earthly triunity to match the heavenly. First, there is the creative idea, passionless, timeless, beholding the whole work complete at once, the end in the beginning. And this is the image of the Father. Second, there is the creative energy begotten of that idea, the working in time from the beginning to the end with sweat and passion, being incarnate in the bonds of matter. And this is the image of the Word. Third, there is the creative power, the meaning of the work and its response in the lively soul. And this is the image of the indwelling Spirit. And these three are one, each equally in itself the whole work, whereof none can exist without the other. And this is the image of the Trinity. She goes on in this book to talk about something that physicists were seeing at the time in 1950. And although it was written in 1950, I think she gets most of the details right, because in some ways, the big questions in physics haven't made a lot of progress since 1950. I mean, I have heard physicists say that. There's a lot of argument about it, but maybe 1950 is not the right year. But for who is it, Elon Musk, that's always saying that in the last 50 years, nothing useful has been done, or maybe it's Peter Thiel. Anyway, here's the quote. I shouldn't have sullied it up with my own cognitive reflections. The conclusions reached by the physicists seem to show the laws governing the behavior of inanimate matter can be reduced to one law, namely that there is no law or code in the arbitrary sense. Matter shakes down at random, goes any old way, does as it likes, does whatever is statistically most probable. This is only another way of saying that the laws of the physical universe are observations of fact. We say that matter is bound to behave as it does because that is the way we see that matter behaves. Consequently, we can't use the laws of physics to construct a hypothetical universe of a different physical kind. Those laws are observations of fact about this universe, so that according to them, no other kind of physical universe is possible. Animate nature, on the other hand, while obeying the law of randomness, appears to be characterized by an additional set of laws. And laws here is in quotation marks. I think she's really talking about principles rather than laws. Back to her quote, including, among other things, the properties of using physical randomness for the construction of purposive order and of promulgating arbitrary codes to regulate its own behavior. I think she's talking about the laws of the universe being this very finely tuned set of constants. But on the other hand, you have the complexities of life and of living things and of immaterial concepts and of imagination and art and drama and music and cooking and gymnastics and basketball, philosophy, anything immaterial, logic that you can think of. Those things reveal themselves through patterns and metaphors and relationships and polarities that arise out of this infinite web of potential, the elements and principles of design. So, what does it mean when we say that we can create something new out of possibility? Is it this weird woo thing that people talk about with The Secret? I don't think so. I think it's something much more fundamental than that. I think it's something that we do every day. Like my husband told me in January that we should redo the kitchen. So that was our goal. So that informed the things that came into our salience field. And we had to start thinking about what we might like it to be like, how we would want it to look, what kind of contractor we wanted. Eventually we hired them. And 5 months later, we have a new kitchen, something that wasn't even in my mind 6 months ago. It never even occurred to me. And now there it is. And my husband does the same thing every time he brings a piece of technology to market. Every baby starts as an idea and is then knit together in her mother's womb and materialized into being. That's what it means to create. We, of course, can only create with the resources that have been gifted to us. So our call is to create with humility, that we are using the resources properly, that we have gratitude for those resources, and that we create truthfully and with the loving gaze that attends carefully and that seeks to gain wisdom through the process. So I'd like to leave you with a quote from Frederick Douglass. He wrote this just when photography was beginning. Poets, prophets, and reformers are all picture makers, and this ability is the secret of their power and of their achievements. They see what ought to be by the reflection of what is, and they endeavor to remove the contradiction. Now remember, he was writing this with an eye to photography because that was a new technology in picture making. So he goes on to warn of what this new technology might do. And he says, this picture-making faculty is flung out into the world like all others, capable of being harnessed to the car of truth or error. It is a vast power to whatever cause it is coupled. For the habit we adopt, the master we obey in making our subjective nature objective, in giving it form, color, space, action, and utterance, is the one important thing to ourselves and our surroundings. It will either lift us up to the highest heaven or sink us to the lowest depths. For good and evil know no limits. Art, he cautions, should harness beauty, but must always be governed by truth above all else. Truth is the soul of art. With the clear perception of things as they are, must stand the faithful rendering of things as they seem. The dead fact is nothing without the living expression. And you remember at the beginning, I promised you that we were going to go back to, oh, wait, you've been on share screen this whole time?
No, we have you.
You aren't? Okay.
You are on speaker.
Okay.
At the moment.
Okay. So I promised you at the beginning that we were going to go back to this. Where did it go now?
I think
we're going to go back to this image of the feast in the house of Levi at the end. So I want you to take a look at this again. Trying to move it over here so you can see the whole thing. Now, this, I can't remember when Veronese was painting, maybe in the late 1600s or early 1700s. And remember the story. This painting was rejected because it didn't give due honor to Christ. So let's look at it for a minute and see what we can see here, because I contemplated this painting for hours standing in the Academia just looking at it. And there's so much going on, and yet he has tightly constrained the visual images so that you will eventually get to the focal point. You're distracted by all these activities that are going on everywhere. There's buying and selling. There's people having fights. There's children playing in the corner. There's a dog. There's all kinds of conversations going on. Commerce and games and things that shouldn't have been done supposedly in the presence of Christ. But the one concession that Veronese made to draw your eye right to the focal point, which is right here in the center, is that he put this little bit of a halo over the head of Christ so that it would draw your eye there. And I kind of think he made that concession to the religious leaders, and it would not have been his choice to do that, because he wanted you to find this after you had contemplated it for a long time. This is the story of this painting, that there is one in that whole crowd that's willing to look where the truth is to be found. Everybody else is trying to find meaning in their own way in all of these activities that have drawn them away from the truth. But truth is found right here. And to me, that's the story of Veronese, and that is the beauty of what he did with this painting. So I'll stop there and take questions.
Okay, Karen, because we've gone so long, I'd like to take a 10-minute break now. I think
that's a great idea.
I think we have, in order to incarnate what you've said, we're going to need to think about it for a few minutes. And then after 10 minutes, we will come back. I'm not going to shut down the session. So if somebody wants to just gently chat for the next few minutes, but please be respectful of Karen so that she can take a break. And Karen, you can, we're not going to do the Q&A while we're taking a break. So why don't you mute yourself and turn off your video so that people aren't directing things to you right now. and
I will take the advantage of a break for sure. I'll be back in 10 minutes.
Right. And meanwhile, others can chat during this break. And when we come back, I'm sure Colleen Kibert has some things to say, and also Tim does. So Colleen will have the honor, and Tim after him. Thereafter, questions will come by hand raises, and so we'll be back. And
okay.
So, pardon?
I'll see you at 12:55.
Yep, that's fine.
Okay.
So I'm wondering if Colleen is back on station. If you are, please unmute and show yourself, Colleen. Okay, we'll give her another couple of minutes.
My picture was up on the YouTube during the break.
Yeah,
So
it's just checking, that's all.
all right, sure. Great presentation, by the way.
Wonderful. Karen, this has been profound, and you've come to exactly the right audience. There are so many reasons why I'm going to tell you that, and talk to you about this later. But anyway, this is really, really appreciated by all the audience. We've had up to 12 online on YouTube simultaneously, I think, and we have had up to 15 on the Zoom chat or the Zoom panel. And oh my God, I'll send you a link after the fact to the talk on my YouTube channel, and you would be welcome to put it on your website as well if you want, or edit it and put it on. I never edit these days because I'm pressed for time given my age, and
I don't edit for exactly the same reason.
but
yeah, I mean, is it possible to send me an MP4 of the to send me your original recording?
I'll make it available to you through Dropbox.
Okay, that'd be great.
Okay, and
if there's anything you want me to link to from the presentation, let me know.
Well, let me put it this way. I am going to create a short description of the video on YouTube over the next 12 hours. And if you want me to put anything like your websites, your URLs and those things in that description, please send them over to me right away so that I have them available.
Will do.
Okay. And Colleen, are you back yet? Okay, not quite. Give her another minute. If she's not back, we'll go to Tim. And then others may go to the bottom of your YouTube screen and put your cursor over the bottom, and you'll see a menu, and there you will see a raise hand icon. So if you want to ask questions after Colleen and Tim, please raise your hand. And we have one taker already. So, okay, Colleen, are you there? Okay, I'm not seeing Colleen yet, so we'll go to Tim to begin with.
Sure. Boy, this has been so rich. Thank you so much, Karen, for this. It's kind of hard to focus in on one particular issue, but
tell me about it.
But one thing that I was really intrigued with is this idea of taking the painting and turning it upside down and looking at what it suggests, sort of making that into the chaos. And I've often done that with paintings, and I've even done it with things like frames. If I really like a frame, but I don't like the finish, I'll instead of redoing it, I'll try to think of something to add to the conversation, And it makes me think, what a wonderful approach to other kinds of problems that don't really work out. Well, I think some of it's obvious. When you redo part of a building, you want to save as much as you can. But I start thinking about approaches to relationships or other parts of our lives where it would be so great to be able to look at a situation in a new way and to try to use that as a creative impulse rather than as just a bad idea. So I was just appreciative of that. There's not really a question. One thing I'm curious about is your, if you have any creative rituals to get you into the spirit of creation, get you out of the left brain and into the right brain.
Well, yeah. So Jordan Peterson was a godsend with that, because I started listening to his lectures while I was painting, and that completely engaged my left brain. So I couldn't get all analytical with my work because I'm listening to him and trying to grok what he's saying, and kept my left brain engaged, and I could just paint. And so my embodied right side is just working with the brushes, with the body movements and so forth. And during that time, some of my really good work happened. I had to do a large 3-panel abstract for a family that had moved to Tucson, Arizona, and came up with some amazing things just out of that whole having my left brain completely engaged. So it's very interesting what happens when you do that. I can't think of any other rituals that I have except procrastination. Finding anything else that I can do except going and doing the work, because doing the work is terrifying. I mean, there's always the thought, what if I can't do it this time? What if nothing arrives? What if I'm a fraud? All of that stuff comes into my mind. And that was when that book, Art and Fear, was so important to me, because all of those feelings always made me feel like I'm a fraud. I'm not an artist. There's no point in even doing this. And then I read that book, and he lists all these feelings that artists have. And I went, oh, that's me.
Yeah.
It's apparently a very obvious thing that other artists deal with all the time.
And I think that's one way of determining whether or not you're really creative edge, because as most people know, one of the worst things that can happen to an artist is success, because then they get to relax and they don't have to think about anything. They can just do the same thing painting over and over again.
Yeah.
And so the fear is I think a sign that you really are on the edge, that you are having a conversation with your unconscious and engaging your creativity.
Well, that's one of the things that I struggled with so much in the early part of working. I took that class 8 times. So 8 different times I did 20 of these big paintings on a certain subject. And after a while, I thought, but I'm not developing my own style, because I'm doing so many styles. How can I ever get down to one style so that I can get into a gallery? That was my goal back in the old days, because a gallery wants you to have a recognizable look. So I used to fight with myself all the time about that and think, this one, this is my style. I'm going to do everything like this from now on. And then I would try to do it, and it would never turn out the same way. I couldn't shut off that creative flow that had started. So everything was always new and different. And
Good
so
for you. That's great.
Every painting I have my house is full of my art. My daughter's house is full of my art. And people walk through there and they think it's a gallery of other people, many people's art all in one place. So,
well,
yeah.
I don't want to hug anymore. Colleen, go ahead.
You have to unmute, Colleen. Colleen, you have to unmute. I don't know why we're still not hearing you.
Maybe she's not on, got her computer sound on or something.
She's very competent at these things, so she should get it shortly. We're still not hearing you, Colleen. No, not hearing you. Not hearing you.
Needs to unmute there.
Well, she unmuted, but we still weren't hearing her. Okay.
She's on mute. She's unmuted now, according to this, but we can't hear her.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sorry, Colleen. Maybe you could log off and log back on. And one other thing to look at is if you're on a Mac, go up to the little apple in your upper left corner and go to Preferences Sound and see what microphone is playing. That may have been changed. Okay, and meanwhile, Jerome, go ahead with your question and then we'll come back to Colleen.
Okay. Well, first of all, Karen, thank you very much. It's a very profound talk, and you've integrated lots of different ideas. And I've followed Jordan Peterson too, and read Maps of Meaning, so I'm quite, familiar with what Jordan's talks about and talks about that process. But what I was interested in is in your progressive, not progressive, but your redemptive painting that you did.
Mm-hmm.
And I noticed that you were able to take other people's drawings and figure out what was forming. And you chose a dragonfly. And then you went on to do the series of the dragonfly. And I really like the metamorphosis, the first one you did, because I think that really says a lot in terms of putting two pieces together. And I just really liked that one. But it's amazing that
I do have something interesting to tell you about that painting if you'd like me to
sure.
share a screen and talk about it for a second.
Yeah.
Surely.
The first, that one. Yeah, that one. Yeah, that's just, says.
Well, I don't know why it's not allowing me to pause it there. There, maybe this will do it. Okay. When I did this work originally, I started with a dark I started by putting a lot of dark blues and grays on the canvas. And then I overlaid that with a lot of color, as much color as I could put over that as possible, trying to let some of the dark show through. And then I wanted to take a kind of an active gray and carve out the figure over on the large figure. So I'm working with the gray and I'm working with it. But there's this little figure down here in the right-hand corner, this little orange blob kind of, that I just couldn't cover up, and I didn't know why. And, my teacher had always taught us, don't be too attached to the precious things. You have to cover them up, let go of the precious thing in order to get a unified piece. But I just couldn't let go of that little precious thing down there. So eventually I made a little home for it, which is that little darker gray area, and kind of tried to state a little bit more what I saw there. I could see a figure there. And so I started trying to work with that a little bit. And I had this painting hanging in my house for a long time before it went to another home. And while it was hanging in my home, I kept looking at it thinking, well, first of all, when I took it to the class for critique, my teacher said, the composition doesn't work because of that thing in the corner. You've got to get rid of it. But it was one time I stood up to him and I said, no, it has a meaning. It's there for a reason. So I wouldn't get rid of it. And as I contemplated it over that long time, I realized that little figure in the right-hand corner, that's me, messy, incomplete, but in process. And the larger one is also me, as I will be someday. So that painting that's why I call it metamorphosis. And it has a very deep meaning for me.
Yeah, because when I first saw the figure, the little figure there, I said, oh, she's emerging from the depths and going the dragonfly. So I said, oh, that is just super.
Well, see, you could see that. I painted it and I didn't even know what it meant. This is why I said that not all your work is intentional. You might think you're intending one thing, but something comes out of it that you can't see, but other people will see. And that's the really fascinating thing about it.
And you did the same thing when you took the other people's paintings. You were able to see what was emerging and put your stamp on it, you know. So I thought that's, so thank you very much. And I think Colleen's back, so.
Still are not hearing you, Colleen. What a shame.
No sound, wow.
Oh my gosh.
Hmm.
No, we're not hearing you. Maybe you can get Wally or someone to help you.
Have you tried the volume control at the top of the computer there? On the menu? Right on the bar, down on the computer,
And your keyboard.
the keyboard. Yeah.
Top of your keyboard, above the above F11 and F12, maybe.
Or the numbers.
F12, go up.
Should be the upper right-hand corner of your keyboard.
Maybe reboot and come on again.
Yeah, sorry about that. We can't hear a word you're saying. Okay, while we're waiting for Colleen to correct her situation, because I'm sorry, Colleen, we just cannot hear you. Somebody on YouTube says, are your speakers on? I don't know if that would have any difference, because it's your mic that we're not getting. But in any case, I'll just make an observation for Miles. And this is sort of an inside baseball for Karen. But Karen has just expressed explicitly why Paul Vanderklay is destined to be disappointed in his expectation that finally Jordan Peterson will say he believes in God in the way that Paul believes in it. You know, that came through on what Karen was saying to me, or what Karen was saying to me, whether anybody else heard it or not. I heard exactly why Jordan Peterson will never answer that question in the way that Paul wants him to. That's my opinion, and I'm sticking to it.
Well, I mean, do you want me to respond to that?
Sure, you can.
So regarding Jordan Peterson and the question, the burning question that's on everybody's mind. First of all, it is important to understand what's meant by the word believe, because when it's been mistranslated in the scriptures, I think, because when you look back at the Greek, it actually means trust. And trust is a relational thing. Trust is putting your weight on someone else. And trust is looking with love. It's not an analytic thing. It's not a propositional thing. So it's an embodied reality. And so this is why I think Jordan Peterson resists using the word believe. And if he understood what is really meant in the scriptures when it says believe on the Lord Jesus Christ and you will be saved, that word believe is actually this word for trust. And in another place, when Christ says, I am the way, the truth, and the life, that word truth is aletheia, which actually in the Greek means reality. I am reality. So when you develop a relationship with reality, when you develop a relationship with the truth, you are actually trusting Christ. And so, I mean, I think Jordan Peterson gets things at a very deep level. My hope for him is that in the midst of that, he also finds some of the peace that comes out of, there's a famous, I don't know if it's a famous quote, but there is a quote that comes out of some of the old biblical commentary that peace is the poise of equilibrated forces. So it's this kind of picture of peace in the midst of the storm.
Equanimity.
Yeah. So that's what I hope for Peterson. He's
Yeah, he
looking
obviously
for the
needs
answer.
it.
If you saw the recent video between Peterson and Vervaeke, they're looking for this answer and they're going after it, and they're striving. And in the striving, Peterson especially is so anxious to get to that place of truth that he's looking for, that it's, he kept saying over and over, I'm in this hot flow. I need to get into a cool flow. Well, that's what I hope for him, is that
That's
cool
what
flow. Yeah.
That's what he absolutely needs. And no, well, I've told him at least one time in a response how he needs to change the question, but and I said, as soon as you're up to it, we'll have a conversation on wisdom paths. But so far, he hasn't taken me up to it, and he's gone to his familiars for the most part since he's come back. And so when he's ready, we'll talk to him. Because he's not going to hear the right thing from Paul. There's no chance of that.
Still Colleen, she's trying to.
Yeah, can we try again, Colleen?
Well,
No.
she's
Oh my God.
But,
We still cannot hear you, Colleen. You might have to invest in a mic at some point. But anyway,
sorry, Colleen.
let me go to
Yep.
yes. Oh,
She could call me, and if she has a comment and I could translate it, she could call me on my phone, or she could call you and talk with you, or she could call Karen. Is that too complicated?
that's going to be too complicated.
Complicated, okay.
There's too much to say.
Okay.
She has too much to say about this
She has
talk.
way too much to say, yeah.
And
Oh, darn.
we Karen, I don't want to tantalize you too much, but we'll have to. One of the reasons I invited you to this was because we've been working with Colleen, who's pretty close to you. She lives in Santa Cruz, but Colleen has been conducting a long-term series with us, and because of some of the things you said in your previous conversations with Paul, I did not expect what you've said today. Let me put it that way. And you've come exactly into the wheelhouse of this group. Mind you, this is a Carl Jung Depth Psychology reading group. And we know each other quite well. And one of the things that we know about Jordan Peterson is that he doesn't understand Carl Jung at all. Okay, he drops his name a lot, and he drops a lot of Jung memes and quotes, but he does not fundamentally understand Carl Jung, not at all. And
well, I'd like to interject here that I have never read Carl Jung, and I don't know his work,
right,
except through little dribs and drabs that Jordan Peterson mentions. So any of the ideas that I have come through just living life.
Yes, well, that's obvious, and we're very pleased to hear them from you for that reason. And we would love to have further conversation with you. There's no question about that. And we're still not hearing Colleen. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. What'd you say, Jerome?
I can mention that the Colleen we've been attending a 12-week course on, it's called Mark of the Self. And you were trying to find your mark and your uniqueness. And so the whole course that she's been teaching us is, we start with the doodle, and what you reminded me of your with the students, they were doing doodles.
Mhm.
So we went through this creative process, and so
Yeah, there's a whole playlist on this on my YouTube channel, and so it's easy to find. It's called Mark of the Self, and so I think it's important that we talk. And I concur with you that you have come to this material ab initio, and so there are a few things that we'd like to introduce you to, but it can't be done now. And so I will I'll talk with you more about that offline. But Miles, go ahead with your question or comment.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you, Karen. You've said some things that are just very, very powerful, such as out of the noise, we can create beauty. And you showed that with the painting where people just put their random colors and shapes onto a canvas. And then out of that, you saw these beautiful fish. And I'm thinking of, I wish I was more artistic. I'm working on it. Thank you to Skip. And artists, musicians, poets, they take elements of noise and they can make beautiful harmony out of it. And that's very, very powerful. And Paul Vanderklay, although I differ from him in my view of who God is, he's been very instrumental as a vehicle for me to connect with people like you, and especially to connect with Skip. And one of the things that Skip pointed out in the first comment he ever made to Paul Vanderklay's YouTube channel was, we have to get over thinking of Jesus as only logos, even though it does say he is the logos. But Skip will elaborate on this in John, how it goes on to say he's also the light. And so Jesus is, and what I'm going to say may be an affront to a lot of people, but bear in mind, I was a person that was handing out cards like this and promoting it's all about Jesus. And I would say it's all about Jesus if you see that from what I saw from what you presented, I look beyond Jesus in that painting that you presented, and you pointed out the halo, and I'm seeing the halo is actually at the focal point. Jesus is not at the focal point in that painting to me. It's the halo. And that is actually exactly at where heaven and earth are meeting, the horizon is. So I'm seeing, as you said, things differently perhaps than you presented or that you saw. So, and this is where, Skip's work has changed my worldview amazingly, because I'm now saying Jesus is agape, eros, philos, and any other versions of love that we want or that we can label. So taking them beyond that. So I'll just conclude that I tweeted this out, and when I say I tweeted it out, let's say that we tweeted it out, because I'm just the person that is incorporating everything that's being provided to me. So I'll say we tweeted this out. And again, this may be an affront to people listening, but I'll say this: Jesus doesn't want anyone to be a Christian. He only asks that a person be his disciple. Be yourself, self with a capital S, which means the God image that is within each of us, as Carl Jung points out in his collected works. It's amazingly simple and simply amazing. Thank you, Karen.
Yeah, Karen, I just want to elaborate a little bit. In October of 2019, I did a talk, which you can easily find on the homepage of my YouTube channel because it's the only thumbnail that looks like a church. And it's called Finding the Living God. And I did that talk 18 months ago or so, and I was thinking about John 1:1, and John 1:1 has never set right with me, okay, because I could never accept that God was a word. So when I started to prepare for that talk, I said, well, there must have been something that has happened since the beginning. So let's see what else has happened since the beginning. I didn't have to go very far because I got down to John 4 and 5, John 1, 4 and 5. And right there, it's explicit. He was the light and the life. And that satisfied me completely. But from my perspective, at least, all the Abrahamic religious leaders that I've ever heard have, put the pedal to the metal on John 1:1, and that never sat right with me ever. And I've been a deacon in the Reformed Church back when I was 30 years old. So that is where I was coming from. But anyway, we don't have to do that here.
Well, I would like to just say that when John 1:1 says, in the beginning, the Word was with God. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. You don't have to think that Jesus is just a word if you understand what a word is. I mean, there's way more to a word than thinking just something, because
let me just...
When Jesus talks about himself, he has 7 things that he is, right? I am the light, I am the way, the truth, and the life. I am the bread of life. I am the door. He's all these I ams, and all of that is wrapped up in that word.
Well, that's great, and I agree with you on all those points. What I would say in my defense is that I was brought up in the Logos entirely. I was born into the Navy, and I served 23 years in the Marine Corps, and then I went off to law school and business school, which was all quant. And so it wasn't until I got out of those indoctrinations that I could even think for myself, okay, in any kind of way, right? And so the idea that there were other definitions of Christ or God never got through to me. And as I say, including at the time that I was a deacon, and I asked my pastor at that time how he would describe God, and it was a stump the stars question. He could not say. And that always troubled me, and I've been struggling to find an answer for myself ever since. So finally, when I saw Carl Jung answer the question, do you believe in God? And he was the son of multiple generations of Reformed pastors also. And he answered, I don't need to believe, I know. My reaction to him saying that was, I too know. And then I had to spend 10 years figuring out what it is that I know. And thanks to him, I got through. So anyway, I want to give Diane a chance. So I apologize for the hijacking of your artistic points, which are also extremely important, it seems to me. So Diane.
Okay, I thought Colleen was back on, but apparently not. I just wanted to say the beauty of your presentation today, I think, was how you synthesize the opposites through creativity, anomaly, background, foreground, inside, outside, and how those bring those two together is triggers the creative response. And that's what I think Colleen has been working on with us in the 12-week Mark of the Self class that we've been doing. And also very central in Carl Jung's thought. So it was his work, his great work. And I just really appreciated how you brought so many things together. And as Jerome said, integrated so many things and bringing it into a whole, a unity. So I really thank you for that. And I got a lot out of your presentation.
Oh, thank you.
Right.
Thank you so much. Well, one of the things I would like to suggest to all of you, if you're interested in one of the people that I discovered recently who thinks the same way I do, except that he is more of a philosopher, theologian, and I'm sure he came to his thoughts through his study, but that would be Dallas Willard. I don't know if you've run into any of his work. There's a whole series of Dallas Willard speaking on YouTube. It's called the Renovare series. And when he talks about these things, and he's a very gentle soul. So when he talks about it, just all these, he leaves space for your mind to work so that you can kind of create a relationship with the ideas that he's giving. And the other thing I wondered if you might want to look into is a series that I did on my channel with 3 guys that are often on the channel that I talk with, that we all kind of generate ideas in each other. We did a series on something called radical orthodoxy, which is a new perspective arising in, maybe a very small quadrant of the church, but a guy by the name of John Milbank and a woman named Catherine Pickstock sort of started this movement back in the early 90s. And so the 3 of us had a conversation about this whole radical orthodoxy, and I did 6 episodes on that on my series, on my channel, where we kind of looked at all the aspects of radical orthodoxy and tried to work out how it fits with the way the world actually is. And I learned a lot of interesting things through that. So that might be something you want to look at too. I think there are more and more people in the church that are understanding the paucity of looking at something as only the logos, because everything has this polarity aspect to it. Everything in the world has this polarity aspect to it. So when you start looking at the science, it's so interesting because things show up either in a one, or they show up in the 2, the polarity, or they show up in the 3. And, it's just there everywhere you look. So, and we talk about those things on my channel, a lot of those things on my channel.
Yeah.
What was the name of the first philosopher? Dallas what?
Dallas Willard,
Willard.
Willard. He started out as a philosopher, and I guess he ended up maybe as a theologian, but his work is, I think, extremely important. He's no longer with us, but a lot of his talks are online.
What was the name? What was the title of that series you mentioned?
Renovare, like renovation, but RE at the end. Renovare.
Thank you.
And so Gilda had a question about an hour and a half ago that we haven't gotten back to yet. It was in the chat. So Gilda, do you want a chance to ask your question now?
You need to unmute, Gilda.
Oh,
there you go.
Yes, well, thank you so much for the presentation. I've made lots of notes and I don't remember which question that was because since it has evolved. But we'll bring out, perhaps if you can unpack, we wrote on the chat that when we saw the first painting that you produced, that you showed that you admired, which was supposed to be the Last Supper, and it was busy with all kinds of activity, we only saw Jesus. That's who we saw. The rest is like muddle noise, let's say. So that told us that what one sees is in direct proportion, relationship, and concurrent with the inner development of the human being's relationship to the truth that
Mhm.
they're able to canalize into being. And so maybe you can speak about that. Whether habits, like when one works on the shadow for a long time and patterns begin to fall away, as well as habits, because they're related, then something else happens that just has an intelligence of its own, and it guides the experience that takes place when we look at something or how we experience. And we're wondering if you have come across that.
Well, I think when I'm listening to, so one of the things I've been trying to do for a long time is listen the way Jordan Peterson says to listen. And that is that you listen, and if a thought arises in your mind, as you're listening, you share that thought. And when you were talking about that just now, it made me think about, first of all, what listening actually is. You're not listening in order to have your own point made manifest or to present your own propaganda or your own point of view. You're listening to hear where truth resides in what is being said. And seeing has that same quality to it. When you're looking, when you're truly trying to see, you're looking in such a way that if your looking is invested with that kind of attending, then the truth arises in the midst of the looking, I guess is the way I would put it. I cut out a lot of my talk as I was going on, and I had quite a bit in there about trees and all the aspects that there are to a tree. So when an artist is looking at a tree and they're getting ready to paint the tree, are they only seeing the tree as the static image of a tree, like a photograph of a tree, or are they seeing all of the different aspects of a tree that make it what it is, and the life of the tree and the dynamic of the tree and its power and its energy and the life-giving nature of a tree and how it produces oxygen for us and, shelters the birds in the branches and how it's composed of all these particles and how they all go together and how it builds its own water system and all the intellect that's in the tree. And all of that, when you look at a tree, when you're painting a tree, if you're really looking at a tree, you're painting, you might not even, there's no way you could paint those things into a tree. But once that inner life takes over, that's because your inner life is so invested with the meaning of that tree, your painting of the tree is also going to be invested with that energy. It's going to be invested with that beauty and that power. And
now, is that separate from communion with the tree?
I don't think so. I don't know if you've ever run into the work of, there's a philosopher named Esther Meek, Meek. And she did a lot of study of the scientific work of Michael Polanyi. And out of that work that she did reflecting on Michael Polanyi, she came up with something she calls the covenantal epistemology. And if I could just encapsulate it very briefly, she says, for example, that if you want to take care of your rose bush, you have to have a relationship with your rose bush.
Mm-hmm.
You have to know everything about your rose bush if you're going to care for it adequately. You have to know what it needs, what causes it to exhibit more and more beauty, how it's going to thrive. I mean, all of those things. So you have to learn to love your rose bush in that way. Look into it, understand the inner workings of it, and build a relationship with it. And that is what knowing, real knowing, actually is. And when you read McGilchrist and he talks about the right hemisphere of the brain, that he doesn't call it that same thing, but the way he talks about it is the right hemisphere of the brain is open to having this relationship with something outside of itself, to welcome that into the thinking process. And then, so the left hemisphere only has access to what the right hemisphere has already invited in. And the left hemisphere plays a very important role, because without it, we wouldn't have things to work with. We wouldn't have, machines and technology and agricultural methods for growing food and all of that kind of stuff. I mean, there's an important role for the left hemisphere, but it is not the only thing. And that, the logos is not alone. The logos is part of a relationship. That's the beautiful thing to me about the Trinity, is that there is this ongoing relationship that's always happening. And that just shows up everywhere.
Yeah.
So anyway, that would be my.
So, Karen, I think Colleen is back, but before I go to Colleen, which would be important for this video, I wanted to ask you one quick question and make a comment if true. I think I remember that you're married to a physicist. Is that correct?
No, he's a technology geek.
Oh, okay.
He's a marketing manager in the technology industry.
Okay. Well, the observation that I've made is that in the physics world, Newtonian physics and quantum physics haven't been able to find the unified field theory, right? And I'll just offer to you that it came to me that the unified field is the human being. And I'll just leave it at that for now. And Colleen, let's try to bring you back.
Jonathan Pajot says that the human being is the mediator between heaven and earth. So
precisely the same thing, exactly the same thing, of course. Colleen, are you there? Colleen, are you able to unmute and show us your smiling face?
She's on, but her camera's off and her microphone's off.
Yes, I see that. Okay. In that case, Miles, you have the next question.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, we're closer than we're apart. Here's a quotation on my little butterfly here on one side. Read this first of all. And what I want to predicate everything I'm going to say about is that Jordan Peterson would probably say that, yes, he is a disciple of Jesus Christ. And in my opinion now, that's good enough. That's his eschatology, and that's his soteriology, his salvation as well. What I'm saying about it's not all about Jesus is I'm postulating that Jesus just asks people to be a disciple. And also he calls to make disciples of all nations. I'm in Canada and I'm learning an awful lot about life from you Americans and integrating that, and a lot from Skip. So discipleship is all that the Bible actually calls for. I don't think you can actually find any quotation in the Bible where there's a statement that you must become a Christian. So because out of Christian, you will create an empire of Christendom. And we are postulating that it's not about creating an empire in Jesus's name. He doesn't want that. This is from Max Planck, who I believe is a physicist. He says, I regard consciousness as fundamental. I regard matter as derivative from consciousness. Now, the next quote I'm going to read is from a famous man, and that is Skip Conover. And what I want to point out is my fear is if we make it all about Jesus and making people like Jordan Peterson become Christian, we are actually going to end up thinking that, oh, that's all we have to do. We end up resting on that, his laurels, as opposed to each of us contributing what we can to solve these wicked problems of existential crises that are all over the place now. So here's Skip. And this came out, he said this while he was presenting Jung's ion researches into the phenomenology of the self. And I wrote it down and I keep it close. God needs human beings because, as far as we know, we are the only consciousness in the universe. So God needs human beings conscious of the wonder of his or her creation. Thank you.
Thank you, Miles. On this rock, I build my church.
Well, okay, so there's a lot there, and I'd sort of like to respond to what came into my mind, because I've been thinking about this a lot. And when Jesus says that he is reality, what does that mean? You know, he says, I am the truth, the way, and the life. He says, I am reality. So, and I believe what he says in the sense of propositionally believing and trusting, and it's integrated into my life. Okay. To me, that means, first of all, the bedrock of my life is that God is good. So, and if Jesus is God, which he is, then Jesus is also good. And if he is reality, which he is, then reality is also good. That's a very different picture than a lot of people have of reality, especially in the United States. You have a large segment of the country, and this is probably true everywhere in the world, that want to create their own reality. They want to live in their own reality. They want to create their own reality. They want to have their own identity that they've created. They want to posit a utopia and then live in that utopia that they have posited. And we all know where that goes. Doesn't go to a good place, because reality is what it is. You have to abide in reality. And I heard an illustration a while back that I thought was so great when the scripture talks about being grafted in, that the Christians, and maybe they weren't even using the word Christian at the time, but the believers were grafted into the nation of Israel. When you make a graft, both the original tree and the new branch being grafted in have to have their bark peeled off, and then they're united, and then they're tied tightly together, and they begin to grow together. Now, you can come along and rip off that branch, and it's no longer going to be united. But as long as it's united and tied together, then they're going to grow together, and there's going to be the life of the original branch is going to be moved into the life of the new branch that's being united with that branch. And that's the way I think about what it means to align with reality. So the thing that I really appreciate about a lot of Jordan Peterson's teaching is he's trying to wake people up to what reality actually is, and that there is a way that things happen. And if you don't participate in that reality, if you try to live in an alternate universe of your own making, there are consequences, and the consequences are painful.
Yes.
But when you align with reality, you begin to get a glimpse of what reality really is. And when you recognize the consequences as the loving correction offered to you by reality, and not as some sort of a punishment, but that loving correction continues to guide you back so that you can align more and more with reality. Now, our lives consist of what time we have. If we're making an effort, if we're attending properly and living the journey properly, then we're more and more trying to align, which is kind of seeing the territory instead of seeing the map, because there's always holes in our map. I think the one quibble I have with what Skip said is when you say God needs human beings, I think God loves human beings, and he made human beings as an opportunity to love, for that love to just spill out and be abundant and over and above all that we could ever ask or think, so that we have love to share out with others. Yeah, there's a lot there. There's a lot there.
I don't want to get into a debate about.
Well, I hope that didn't feel like a debate, Skip. I hope
no,
that.
No, it does. It doesn't, but I don't want also for us to devolve into one.
Yeah.
Because there's so much packed in there, and there's so much I would like to share with you about Jerry Wright's perspective, for example, who was a practicing Presbyterian minister for 25 years, but fell off the back porch of the church, as he says metaphorically, and became a Jungian analyst. And now he's retired from even that, so he's written a couple of books recently. So that's beyond the scope of this conversation here. And so I'll just leave it at that. Unfortunately, I would love for Tim to respond also, but Tim had another engagement, so he's had to leave us. Colleen, are you able to talk to us yet? I'm not sure if she hears me yet. She has a son who's
she's probably just listening because it's been that like that for a while. But
okay. All right.
Yeah. Do you think we ought to conclude then?
Yeah, maybe we should, and because I too have an engagement this evening that I have to be prepared to, and although Jerome had offered to continue to host you, Karen, I think we probably are reaching max brain fulfillment at this time, and
I just you give us hope and a new way of seeing is what.
Yes, very much so, and I really appreciate that, and I really appreciate your correcting my thinking vis-a-vis your appearances with Paul, and that has clarified a lot to me, and so I do want to talk with you some more and talk about that, but I'll just leave it at that for now, because you and I can talk offline about those things. Miles and I have been following Paul diligently for 3 years now, and we sometimes hector him, but he's taken it in good spirit. Paul and I have had one interview together, which you can easily find on the homepage of this YouTube channel, and you'll see it about 50 minutes into it or something like that. That he makes this comment about Jordan Peterson being a Jungian, and I said, Paul, yeah, he's actually the opposite of being a Jungian, and I can prove that point very easily, but that isn't the scope of this conversation. So you can find that conversation between Paul and me on my YouTube channel and also on Paul's. And meanwhile, we'll talk some more, because I really loved what you said today. In so many ways, it's so rich. It's going to be, I'm sure that there are many of the followers of this YouTube channel who will come back and listen to this multiple times, and I know I will. And
Well, I want to say to the followers of your YouTube channel that if you actually want to know what I think, you have to go through 144 hours of my YouTube channel. But you can get a pretty good idea by just looking through a few of the series, which I can highlight some of that information for your listeners in your description of the video.
that would be terrific, which I will do, which I will add to the description. That is a promise. And I will also provide you with this this recording. And to Colleen, I am so sorry that you were not able to participate in this conversation, because it would have been so important for Colleen's interaction to be here.
Well, if Colleen wants to send me an email, I think you have my email address,
Yes,
and
ma'am.
she can send me an email. We can have an email conversation. So,
Yeah, I think that's quite possible, and we'll be talking more. So other things before we hang out. Oh, Gilda has one more thing. So my guess
I remember
is,
the question. It was about observing something as chaos, or observing it something as an abstraction that we just don't understand, or because we don't understand it, we say it's chaos. So can you speak about chaos and abstraction?
okay, I'm not sure I used the word abstraction, so it's interesting that you heard that. But Jordan Peterson is always talking about order and chaos. He sometimes also talks about the known and the unknown, but I kind of think that's a better framework, in my mind at least, because everything from here on out is unknown. Everything from this moment forward is unknown. So it would be too much right now to go into the whole thing about chaos theory and complexity theory and all those things that I talk about on my channel. But in some ways, chaos, if you're thinking chaos theory, chaos is not random. And chaos actually, if I remember right, I might be getting this wrong, but I think chaos actually is very deterministic. But I don't think the unknown is deterministic. So to me, there's a difference between saying that the future holds the potential of chaos and the future is the unknown, because all of the potential information and knowledge and wisdom is out there in the unknown that needs to be brought into the known. So that's what we're doing as we navigate through life, is discovering these things that are in the unknown and making them known. And so I want to differentiate. I'm not crazy about using the word chaos, but it's a handy word to use because that's the framework that Peterson set up, this difference between order and chaos. I think what he's really talking about is just what happens to us when we are thrust into the unknown and we're surrounded by all kinds of things we don't understand. And in my own life, I went through and I don't want to go into it here because it's a long story, but I went through a very, very traumatic time in my life that went on for several years, where many, many things happened that had the potential of being completely disorienting and destabilizing and, just stopping my direction in life, whatever. But because God was in the midst of that and was helping me to orient my vision of what was happening, there was a path through. And so that is when I talk about the chaos, what I really mean is this place of hidden treasure. So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
And my story shows up on Paul's channel. My story shows up in my YouTube videos. So
yeah. So I just like to mention at the end here that the duality that we typically talk about on this channel is a duality between logos, which in the case of the Bible is the word, and eros. And Jordan Peterson considers the eros chaos, but here we consider that that eros is where we live our lives, and so chaos is in the eros, but it is also our lives are in it. And the way I describe this from an experiential point of view is to look around the room in which you sit, and everything that is not a human being or a potted plant is dead. And it's all the result of logos. Okay, logos gets us all these things, but none of it is alive. It's we that are alive. And that is not in the logos, it's in the eros. And I would argue that's where Jesus Christ is as well. But anyway, that's the duality, just so you understand where we're coming from, because typically that's the main duality that we talk about, which isn't logos and chaos, it's logos and eros.
Assuming... to me, the important thing, and so this will be my last shot here.
Okay.
To me, the important thing is not to think of something as a duality, as opposites, but to think of it as a polarity.
Okay, fair enough. And we would think of it as very multiple dimensional and diverse.
Yeah. So one needs the other. They're working together. It's a polarity, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Right.
And so it isn't one or the other, it's one and the other.
Right.
Yeah. Right.
Yep. Okay.
So hey, I gotta go because
we all
my
do.
husband is in there trying to get lunch. So
right. All right. So thank you so much, Karen. This has been just a wonderful presentation, and we'll be talking. I hope you'll take my calls.
sounds good. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
All right. Peace. Take care, everybody. We'll see you.
Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.
Yeah, on the 24th, we will have a session, but not on the 17th for all followers here. And that will be Nizomi Hayase, who will be very interested.